Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Starship designs are a lot more timeless in the Star Wars galaxy than you would imagine. In our own world, manufacturers are updating designs yearly in order to incorporate the latest in aesthetics and technology. Many businesses, after all, are publicly traded companies and always looking to expand and grow on a quarterly basis. And when the consumer demand is not there, they simply just create it. But the Star Wars timeline goes on much longer than our own, and there are great periods of stability and then great periods of turmoil as well. This affects how ship designers produce starships. For instance, in times of great peace or perhaps stagnation, it wasn't uncommon for a single ship design to be utilized without much change or competition for centuries. And so today we'll be taking a look at some of the longest continuously operating ships in the Star Wars galaxy. When the Lightmaker made one of the most cost-efficient kills in Star Wars history by ramming two Imperial Star Destroyers into one another and then into the shield gate over the planet of Scarif, some of you hawk-eyed individuals would immediately recognize the hammerhead shape of the small Rebel Corvettes, especially fans from the old Republic or KOTOR era. And that's because this Dreadnought-class Hammerhead Corvette pays homage to a classic old Republic design, the Hammerhead-class Cruiser. The Hammerhead-class Cruiser was manufactured by Rendelli Hyperworks. This was way back in the day before the dominance of companies like Quat Drive Yards and Senior Fleet Systems. We're talking almost 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. At the time, Republic ships were designed with a very aggressive forward attack mentality. And so most Republic ships at the time had the majority of their armor, weapons, and shields positioned in the bow of the ship, like this 170-meter Praetorian-class frigate, which served as an escort ship for the Republic fleet. Notice how this ship presents a very narrow profile from the front. This makes it much harder for enemies to hit it from that direction. And any shots they do successfully make on this ship will hit the most armored and shielded areas and not the more vulnerable engineering compartments and thrusters in the rear. The Hammerhead Cruiser would build off of the success of this design. At 350 meters in length, it was quite small for a capital ship even at the time. For example, Revan used the fleet of 600-meter-long Interdictor-class cruisers as the backbone of his fleet during the Jedi Civil War. But thanks to its dense weapons clusters and shield generators all positioned below and above the cockpit, as long as the Hammerhead Cruiser presented only the front of the ship to its enemy, it could take on cruisers and destroyers twice its size and still survive. The Hammerhead Cruiser would debut during the Great Sith War, and it would perform so well that Rendelli Star Drives was basically forced to produce one of these every 10 days for years. During the Mandalorian Wars just a few decades later, the Hammerhead Cruiser would be called up to the front lines, after a third of the Republic fleet was essentially stolen by Revan. 3 centuries later, by the time of the Great Galactic War, which also had a Battle of Hoth but should not be confused with the Galactic Civil War, the Hammerhead Cruiser once again would be called into service. The last record we have of the Hammerhead Cruiser in action comes during the New Sith War. This was a period of great turmoil and chaos in the Republic, ranging from 2000 BBY to 1000 BBY. Many of the Republic's outer rim territories were cut off by the Sith Empire during this terrible time. Darth Bane, a prominent Sith Lord from the period who fought until the very last day of the war, recalled commonly seeing the Hammerhead Cruiser in action during this time period. It wasn't until after the war ended in 1000 BBY that the Hammerhead Cruiser would finally be retired from active duty from the Republic fleet. It should be noted that while the Ruusan Reformation disbanded the federal military, it also gave more subsidies to local defense forces who might have purchased some of these Hammerhead Cruisers from the dismantled federal fleet. So we believe the Hammerhead Cruiser served a minimum of 3,000 years in the Republic, and perhaps several hundred years more after the Ruusan Reformation. Now, you can't talk about the Hammerhead Cruiser without also talking about the Auric-class tactical strike fighter. This was the starfighter that protected the vulnerable rear and flanks of the Hammerhead Cruiser. Throughout its 3,000 years of operation, the Hammerhead Cruiser commonly carried around a dozen Auric-class tactical strike fighters inside of its hangar as well. Auric, which is the first letter in the Arabic alphabet and also just simply A in the High Republic alphabet, was essentially the A-wing of its day. As a matter of fact, the Delta 9 Ether Sprite Light Interceptor from the pre-Clone Wars era was heavily inspired by this thin dagger-like flying wedge. At just 9.2 meters long, these small fighters featured variable geometric wings and had both laser cannons and proton torpedoes on board, making it dangerous to fighters and capital ships alike. Equipped with a Class II hyperdrive, this tiny fighter was well-rounded and capable of doing all sorts of missions. Combined with its tiny size, it's no surprise that the Republic would use this fighter for almost 4,000 years. It would start its service during the Great Sith War like the Hammerhead Cruiser, and then serve all the way until the Imperial period. In its last 1,000 years of service, it was quite popular amongst Outer Rim shipyards. Prior to the clashes with the Sith, the Old Republic ran afoul of Zim the Despot and the Alsicans, two factions known for having colossal starships. This inspired the Republic to commission their own massive command ship, the Invincible Dreadnought, from Rendeli's star drive in 3017 BBY. At 2,011 meters in length, this was the largest Republic capital ship of the era. Equipped with 30 laser cannons, 6 concussion missile launchers, and 12 turbo lasers, this ship was underarmed for its size even by standards back then. To make matters worse, because of advances in technology and the miniaturization of weapons, most fleets were moving towards more maneuverable, fast-speed ships that were smaller in size. The Hammerhead Cruiser was going to be the mainline capital ship of the Old Republic, not some massive 2-kilometer-long money sink. And so, with limited competition available, the Invincible-class Dreadnought never became a very popular ship for different factions to purchase, and at the same time, it never faded away either. And so, by the Imperial era, there were still Invincible-class Dreadnoughts floating around the galaxy. That means they've been in service for over 3,000 years. After Darth Vader suffers some gruesome injuries because of his lack of high ground on Mustafar, Emperor Palpatine comes to his rescue with this Special Theta-class T2C Shuttle. Now, we don't get to see much of this fancy starcraft from Cygnus Spaceworks, but it's top of the line in almost every way. It had a Class 1.0 hyperdrive, ridiculously powerful sublight engines, along with enough armor to escape most unfriendly pursuers. Palpatine also had the Worthen Wizards take a look and upgrade his ship. These guys were basically the best aftermarket mechanics in Coruscant. What might surprise you is that the Theta-class shuttle that Palpatine is using here is somewhat of a classic or even a relic. You see, these ships have been in service since 1990 BBY, which means it's been in active duty for almost 1,000 years. The Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser designed by Rendeli's star drive in 119 BBY very much represented what clients were looking for at the time. Smaller capital ships that put an emphasis on defensive capabilities rather than offensive were in vogue. This 600-meter-long capital ship was based off of an old Mandalorian ship design that featured thick, heavily armored hulls. It would remain a popular ship for planetary defense forces all across the galaxy and was even used by the Jedi in their extragalactic exploration mission. Rendeli's Star Drive's business model was to essentially sell the license for its ships to other shipyards. This is what really increased the popularity of the Dreadnought. In canon, these ships were still being used by both sides of the Galactic Civil War, but in Legends, we see the Dreadnought-class heavy cruiser active all the way until 127 years after the Battle of Yavin, which means the ship was active for at least 250 years. Next up is the Crucible. This was an ancient Paladin-class corvette utilized by the Jedi Order to ferry younglings to the secret world of Alum, home to the magical Kyber crystal caves jealously guarded by the Jedi since the beginning of time. It is here that the younglings would go under a trial to find their first Kyber crystal, or did the Kyber crystals find them? Anyway, once they have survived this trial and collected the crystals, they would board the Crucible once again, and the ship's keeper, Professor Hu Young, would open his Jedi lightsaber shop, and help build the perfect lightsaber for every youngling. Apparently, Hu Young has been doing this in the Crucible for over 1,000 years. Unfortunately, this ancient relic and piece of Jedi history would be destroyed by Hondo Ohnaka and a bunch of pirates looking for that fresh booty. As a bonus, we'll be taking a look at the Rakan Infinite Empire's main ship, simply known as the Rakan ship. There aren't many records of the Rakan Empire left in modern times, but their effect on the galaxy was profound. At one point in time, they controlled most of the known galaxy and enslaved much of its population. By moving their slaves from one world to another, the Rakan Infinite Empire seeded many empty worlds with sentient beings. The Rakan ship was first sighted in 25793 BBY. These were mass-produced from the Rakan Starforge, a super-replicated space station used by the Infinite Empire to create its massive armies and fleets. The Infinite Empire would collapse in 25200 BBY, which means the Rakan ship was utilized for at least 600 years before the Rakans succumbed to a plague that ripped the Force away from them. All Rakan technology, including their ships, required the Force to operate. So there you have it, guys, 6 different designs that were utilized by different factions for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. And it wasn't always just about how good a design was. It also really mattered what the political and economic climate was at the time. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. I know a lot of you guys are complaining about being unsubscribed, so please do check and make sure you are subscribed. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.